Thank you so much for joining us tonight and taking part in our event. My name is Terry Hornstein. I'm a news anchor and reporter in Miami-Dade County, but I also lived in Palm Beach County for 5 years, and I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's 710 event. So first of all, we want to start with a question here. So want to ask everyone, you can reply in our chat there. What do you think the number one drug children 17 and under are overdosing on in Palm Beach County? Go ahead and write those answers in the chat there, what you think the answer is. Well, many of you would guess prescription drugs, but would it surprise you to find out that the number one drug that youth overdose on in Palm Beach County is marijuana? It would probably surprise a lot of people, honestly. So Florida Poison Control Centers have already seen 2 spikes in the number of calls about children being exposed to THC. One of those with medical marijuana, the other is with some of the hemp-based products. So with this overdose trend, similar in other counties, not just in Palm Beach County, that's the reason, though, we have the Southeast Florida Community Coalitions of Broward, Indian River, Martin, Palm Beach, and St. Lucie counties have all joined together to educate the community on such an important topic here. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the significance of 710 Day observed on July 10th, so today, it's recognized within the cannabis culture to celebrate concentrated forms of marijuana. So we're talking about oils and dabs. The term 710 resembles the word oil once you flip it upside down, which is really why it's become associated with cannabis oil products. So we've all pretty much heard of 420 Day. It celebrates marijuana in general, but 710 Day, relatively newer, it celebrates the high potency extracts called dabs. So this 710 event tonight, it's going to highlight the increasing trend of marijuana use among youth and the impacts on their health. And tonight, we're going to hear from local, state, and some national experts, and they'll share personal stories backed up with data that shows a rise in usage rates among teenagers due to legalization and social acceptance as well. So this 710 joint event will highlight some adverse effects on youth, including impaired cognitive development, mental health issues like anxiety and depression, and even potential marijuana dependency. So a very important topic here. And we want to thank you once again for taking part in our event. And we do have a list of speakers from various backgrounds with different knowledge about the subject. So I'm going to just introduce who you'll be hearing from tonight. All right, so let's get started. We will start with Jordan Davidson. He is the Government Affairs Manager for SAM, or the Smart Approaches to Marijuana organization. This is a bipartisan group dedicated to a health-first approach to marijuana policy. When he was 17 years old, he entered into a long-term addiction recovery after struggling with marijuana dependency prior to that. So he has since worked in politics at the state and local level. The next person you'll hear from tonight is Dr. Terry Stockham. She's one of the few experts in the country who has 3 degrees focused on the specialty of forensic toxicology. She worked for a number of medical examiners' offices, including as the chief toxicologist in Broward County for 6 years. She also served with the medical examiner's office in New York City, as well as in Richmond, Virginia. She is now a consultant, a lecturer, and author on the topic of forensic toxicology. She currently also has her own consulting firm. Our third speaker tonight is Dave Sharp. He's the director of the Broward County Sheriff's Office Department of Community Programs. He has more than 30 years of experience working within the criminal justice system. The majority of his career has focused on criminal justice reform with an emphasis on community corrections. He has served in various capacities over his tenure. His primary focus, though, it's on the implementation of evidence-based practices to reduce the high rate of offender recidivism. And next up, we will hear from Marvalee Mondesir. She's a senior in the Digital Media Academy at Santa Lucia's Community High School. She is an event organizer for Palm Beach County Behavioral Health Coalition's Teen Coalition and in action, as well as Best Buddies, making us all look bad here. She says she is dedicated to making positive change. She is a leader among her peers and is our teen voice this evening. And we'll also hear from Ellen Snelling. She's the board chair for the Hillsborough County Anti-Drug Alliance. She has worked with the Alliance since 2000. Their mission is to prevent youth and adult substance abuse and promote healthy communities. She received her Master's of Science degree from Florida International University. So again, just want to thank all the speakers who are here tonight and really taking part to discuss such an important topic and having this really important conversation. So let's get started with Jordan. He'll be discussing the impact of marijuana, the legality when it comes to youth, his personal story, and what's at stake here. So take it away, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Terry, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone making this event possible today. My name is Jordan Davidson, and I am the Government Affairs Manager for SAM, or Smart Approaches to Marijuana. We are a national policy group that is dedicated to putting public health and public safety first, and really protecting our kids when it comes to marijuana policy. So I think I'll start out by kind of discussing my story and why I'm here in front of you today, and why I've worked for almost 5 years in the drug policy space. As Terry said in her introduction, I am blessed to have this year in December, it will be 6 years of sobriety. I got sober on December 9th, 2018, after struggling with cannabis use disorder or marijuana addiction. At that time, I was a senior in high school, but I started my marijuana use much earlier. I thought marijuana was totally safe. I thought it was just a plant, that it was non-addictive. And that's what the messaging is really to our youth and young people today. And so I unfortunately fell into addiction, like many people in our country and around the world, in your communities. My family struggles with addiction. My mom got sober when she was 19, thankfully, and I was educated about some things regarding drugs, but mainly alcohol. I didn't really know that much about marijuana. And so when I was young in high school, I had a really close friend who wasn't a bad person, is still a great guy, but he fell into using marijuana. It's not that, all these people are just bad kids, right? And he introduced me to smoking marijuana. I had no idea what I was doing. I rarely was using joints or low potency THC products. What I was using as a young person were these really high potency marijuana vapes that are reaching upwards today of 99% THC. That's in marked contrast to the 2 to 5% THC Woodstock weed of the 1970s, not your grandma's marijuana. So I began using that. And quickly, I realized that I was self-medicating. Like a lot of other young people, I was struggling with anxiety, mental health problems that are plaguing communities and young people today in large numbers. And I just thought, okay, I'm smoking marijuana. And when I'm smoking marijuana, I feel better. I feel more confident. I feel like the things that I'm dealing with don't seem as big. The outside world, kind of that noise, didn't seem as loud. And so I kept doing it, thinking that that was a solution. Little did I know that it was just a Band-Aid. And quickly, I began developing even more problems. So especially the summer before my senior year of high school, my use really spiraled totally out of control. I was losing friends. I was kind of limiting my relationships. I was mainly hanging out with the people who were selling me marijuana so I could get more free marijuana. I was even honestly regret to admit taking money from people who I loved just so I could support my addiction. I finally got to a point where I hit a low. I looked at myself in the mirror one night and I didn't recognize the person that was looking back at me. Felt like I just looked into hollow eyes. I felt like a shell of a person. And that was not something that was acceptable to me. I had, friends around me, support systems, people telling me it's time to start talking about stopping, not just slowing down. Friends held an intervention for me and took my paraphernalia. And of course I took it back. But it didn't last long. Finally, kind of the last straw for me was my girlfriend at the time told me, it's either me or your addiction and the marijuana, because I wasn't being there for the people who I loved and who I cared about. And so thankfully, I made the decision to stop. But I barely lasted even a day before I kind of broke down to my parents and essentially begged for help. So thankfully, my mom knew what to do, and she put me into an outpatient rehab program, started doing Narcotics Anonymous meetings, 12-step meetings, doing my 90 meetings in 90 days. And it worked for me. And so luckily now I have, as I said, almost 6 years, 5.5 years roughly of sobriety. And I am fully invested in this space as someone who cares about making sure that the next generation, that this generation doesn't go through what I had to go through in order to realize that this drug actually has harms. So, kind of we'll transition now into talking about some of the policy items or just statistics, really, things that we're seeing across the country, especially as marijuana becomes more widely legal, becomes more normalized within our culture. I mean, youth perceptions of the risk of marijuana is significantly lower today than it has been in the past, and rates of use are going up. Something startling that actually recently came out from a major study from drug policy experts shows that even though at the national level, marijuana use is significantly lower in its prevalence among all age groups than alcohol use, daily or near daily marijuana use, the people who are most likely to become addicted to marijuana, that level is higher than alcohol. Millions and millions of people, especially young people across our country, are using marijuana every day. Somewhere between probably 15 and 20 million people, according to national data, would likely meet the definition for having a clinical cannabis use disorder. It is rapidly devolving into really what I consider a crisis. We're dealing with addiction and mental health problems, and yet a lot of people seem to be all in on marijuana and think that it's this fantastic, great drug. So what we're seeing in terms of the latest research that's really coming out, the largest concern for me is addiction and mental health. So you might have heard, back, 5-10 years ago, even, that the addiction rate for marijuana is about 9%, 10%, 1 in 10 people. Today, it is entirely different. If you look at data that's cited by the CDC, that's cited by NIH, you're seeing that marijuana has about a 30% addiction rate today. And you might ask why. And the reason why is because of the potency. As I said in the beginning, the potency of today's THC is significantly higher on average. 1995, it was less than 4% on average what they were seizing on the street. And in 2021, it was above 15%. 15% today would even be considered low, honestly, especially based on what they're selling in these dispensaries. So that 1 in 3 people getting addicted to marijuana who end up using it is really startling. What we're also seeing, especially in states, where marijuana has been made legal, that after that happens among 12 to 17-year-olds, really some of the most vulnerable populations, there is an increase of 25% in the prevalence of cannabis use disorder, cannabis addiction. That's another startling statistic showing the impact of normalization and policy changes on young people. We're even seeing really startling data about specific mental health problems. There have been studies. There's one study out of Denmark that measured, about 5 or 6 million people, showing that there's about 15 to 30% of schizophrenia cases among young men could have been avoided if marijuana use had been avoided, if they hadn't started smoking marijuana in the first place, because we're seeing that heavy use of high potency THC is leading to about a 5-fold increase in the chances of someone developing psychosis. Actually, has a name, cannabis-induced psychosis. We're also seeing increasing rates of other drug use. There's this whole thing about, is marijuana a gateway drug? Is it, what is it really? I think that's a loaded term. A lot of people agree or disagree. But what I know from my personal experience and what we're seeing in the data is that if you start smoking marijuana, the social circles that you're surrounding yourself with is likely going to be filled with people who are using other substances. And that's going to make you more prone from that social pressure, from people offering you other things, and more likely to use those other drugs. We're also seeing really negative detriments in educational outcomes. That's just from marijuana use and even from where dispensaries are. We're actually seeing statistically significantly lower rates of educational growth if they put dispensaries near schools. We're also seeing, based on longitudinal studies, there's one study that actually dates back to the 1970s, following people for decades, checking in with them every few years and kind of analyzing capacity and functioning, showing that if you are a heavy marijuana user, you can suffer from about up to 8 points of IQ drop. that is a seriously significant reduction in intellectual capacity. And that is translating to lower high school completion rates, lower university entrance scores. In terms of high school completion, we're seeing a reduction of less than 28% lower high school completion rate with medium to high intensity marijuana use. So, I don't have much time left here, but as you can see, this isn't a joke. This is something that needs to be taken seriously. And the final note that I'll end on is I feel like there's almost a cognitive dissonance. It doesn't even make sense. Decades ago, everyone was really concerned about drug use. People were really concerned about marijuana. And funny enough, marijuana was far less dangerous back then than it is today. Today, when it's a much more harmful substance, people seem to be even less concerned. So that's some kind of food for thought about how we're shaping the conversation, how we're thinking about it, and the impact of normalization. So thanks so much for welcoming me today. I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of the speakers and hearing some Q&A at the end, hopefully.
All right, Jordan, thank you so much. I think really powerful to listen to your story and your history with marijuana and to speak to others about it. Okay, so next up here, we have Dr. Stockham. She'll be discussing driving and influence, THC vomiting, and some other health issues as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Stockham, for joining us.
Hi, thank you. As a toxicologist, I study the toxic effects of compounds. So that will be the focus of my presentation tonight. I will cover the physical health aspects of marijuana use, and Ellen will cover mental health aspects. You all should know by now that marijuana is a complicated substance. It contains 500 chemicals, over 100 of which are the cannabinoids. A mixed bag of beneficial and harmful effects are to be expected. Let's begin with the brain. THC is addictive. Tolerance does develop, and dependence does develop. And you heard that firsthand from Jordan. When used acutely, there is a lack of attention, psychomotor decrements, and short-term memory loss. When used chronically, one sees a similar pattern: attention span, memory, and cognitive deficits. THC use is not without risk, especially in adolescents and young adults. Use when the brain is still developing is a really bad idea. College students report drinking more alcohol when using marijuana, and the combined effect is more impairing than when used separately. And that's when you get these risky behaviors in young adults. The gastrointestinal system. There is a long-term hyperemesis syndrome where you have recurrent bouts of intense vomiting. The mechanism is poorly understood, and it's actually contrary to the antiemetic properties that others report, for instance, cancer patients. Effects on the heart: increases blood pressure, increases heart rate, increased risk of heart attack and stroke, and especially with people with underlying cardiovascular disease, it's going to be a problem. The lung: coughing, wheezing, emphysema, bronchitis. I want to especially talk about vaping. If you're using cartridges of oils, waxes, butters, you're ingesting oil into your lungs. And I would ask if your thing with common sense thinks it is a good idea to put oil into your lungs. The reproductive system. In males, you have a decreased fertility and sperm count. In females, you're going to have low birth rates and increased risk of sleep problems in those children. The immune system. This is a real double-edged sword. It absolutely impairs the immune system. There's immune suppression, which increases susceptibility to cancer and viral infections such as HIV. But that also opens the door to develop medications to treat autoimmune diseases like arthritis, MS, lupus, hepatitis. So you can see marijuana affects the whole body, not just the brain. The recent change in the federal scheduling is good news for those who want to research and study it. There is lots of anecdotal evidence of the benefits, but we all want to see peer-reviewed clinical trials to be conducted. I want to end with the effects on driving. The THC is definitely impairs driving, and people like to combine marijuana and alcohol, and the two act additively. So the combination is quite impairing while driving. You're going to see lots of drivers blow less than a 0.08 on a breath test, but fail roadside sobriety tests. When the urine is collected, it's positive for marijuana, and that kind of explains that pattern. If we're just going to rely on a breath test, then impaired drivers are going to go undetected. State attorneys aren't likely to prosecute people that blow a breath test below a 0.08 gram percent. I also want to mention polysubstance abuse. It's rampant and it's the norm in our country. It's not the exception. So what we're going to need is more drug recognition experts, DREs. We're going to need a roadside test to detect marijuana impairment. Can now use oral fluid or breath tests. There's actually a breathalyzer being developed now. It's being used in the workplace to detect recent marijuana use. So I'm going to urge those in a position to do so to decide early what a robust drugs and driving program will entail, and be ready to implement that right away if recreational marijuana is legalized in our state. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Suckham, thank you so much. Just a wealth of knowledge with your background. So good to hear from you and hear all of that information. I had not heard of that breathalyzer before today. So thank you so much. Okay, next up is Dave Scharf. He's going to show us what the products we're talking about here look like. He'll discuss Circle K as well. And he'll also talk about a scary situation dealing with a group of children and marijuana that happened within Broward County. It was actually on the news. A lot of us heard about it, and he's going to go into depth with that. Dave, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Terry, and thank you to this group for putting this forum together. It's extremely important. Again, my name is Dave Scharf. I'm the Executive Director of Community Programs for the Broward Sheriff's Office, Fort Lauderdale. I bid you greetings from Sheriff Greg Toney and the 6,000 members of our agency. I also happen to chair the United Way Commission on Behavioral Health and Drug Prevention. Also fortunate to be able to chair Broward County's opioid action team. So while I'm not a clinician, while I'm not a doctor, or I'm not a toxicologist, I get to see what happens on the front lines every single day. And I got to tell you folks that this issue is alarming. It's scary. And my job is to make sure that young people in our community do not become susceptible to this, do not use this product. So if we can take a look at the first slide or so. So what you see there, folks, the first slide or the second slide, doesn't matter. You're going to see how these products are being marketed to our young people in dispensaries, in convenience stores, and other places. The whole idea is to mimic what young people like. Candies, gums, gummies, chocolates, lozenges, beverages, Cheetos. You'll see all these different types of marketing ploys by these manufacturers to entice young people toward this. But the scary thing is with medical marijuana as well, is that young people in the homes get a hold of these products and distribute them to their friends as they would any other candy. And what's scary about that is that the young people who are taking it have no idea what it is. They think it's a regular piece of candy or a brownie or a cookie. And as Jordan said, the concentrations of THC can vary tremendously based on the products. And how many kids do you know who will consume one gummy bear? I know I won't. You're going to have a whole bunch more than that. And the way that the marijuana is distributed via that route is much more slowly than it would be if it was smoked. So a young person could ingest 5-10 gummy bears. The THC levels can be extremely high, resulting in what could be an overdose or even a fatality. What I see in a lot of different in a lot of different forums and overdose fatality reviews is that, and it was said before, polysubstance use. When people die of other drugs, very typically marijuana is there as well. And whether it came via this route or not, we don't know. But polysubstance use is an issue and is a major problem within our community. If we can go to the next slide, please. So you will hear this a little bit more later. You've heard it before. When a young person ingests, whether it's Delta 8, Delta 9, whether it's a low concentration level of THC or high concentrations, you're going to see all the signs that you'd see in an adult. Impaired motor ability, as Dr. Stockham said, vomiting, confusion, psychotic episodes, hallucinations. What Jordan talked about in the concentrations, 95 to 99%, if ingested, those will cause hallucinations very similar to what you would experience on LSD from the 70s. It's really, really scary. And you heard all the other things about heart problems and anxiety and dizziness, slurred speech. So if your child comes home in that position, if you're a teacher and you see children in your class who are suffering from that, you're going to know that there's a good possibility that there was some THC involved in this. And we had a couple of incidents here in Broward County, two of them rather recently. One was at the Boys and Girls Club in Lauderhill, one of our largest cities. The other was at a middle school in Lauderdale Lakes, probably half an hour from my office at the sheriff's office here in mid Broward County. So it's there, it's a problem, and we need to get a hold of it. So if we can show that video real quick, I think that kind of sums it up.
Right now, at least 2 students sickened at South Florida schools after eating what they thought was candy.
Well, they turned out to be marijuana edibles. And Local 10's Cody Weddle live now, is in Lauderdale Lakes with a warning from parents.
2 different kids becoming ill after they ate candies that look nearly identical to other common candies for kids, but these candies contained THC.
He was high. He couldn't stay woke. Like the whole day he slept.
You're looking at a 12-year-old who accidentally became high on marijuana.
I was upset. I was really upset.
Christy Bradley says her son, Derek Gage, ate a marijuana edible at Lauderdale Lakes Middle School on Monday.
I felt weird and dizzy.
Another student gave it to him, he says, and he had no idea it contained drugs, since it looked like a regular candy.
It was pink. It wasn't exactly hard. It was like it felt like a Sour Patch, but it wasn't a Sour Patch.
It marks the second incident this week of a child accidentally eating marijuana-infused candy in our area.
I'm feeling good.
Feeling better?
Yes.
At 6, we spoke to Christiana Simonet from a hospital bed. The 9-year-old says she accidentally ate an edible at Bunch Elementary School on Tuesday. That candy was meant to look and taste just like this chewy sour candy called Airheads Extremes. But look closely, the marijuana-infused candy is called Gas Heads, and aside from a tiny pot leaf and the dosage marked at the bottom, the rest of the packaging and graphics are nearly identical.
I'm very upset because my son is only 12 years old and he's tested positive for marijuana.
We did receive a statement from Miami-Dade Public Schools acknowledging this incident and promising to investigate along with police. We've also reached out to Broward County Public Schools as well, but we have so far not heard back. We're in Lauderdale Lakes. I'm Cody Weddle, Local 10 News.
So that kind of sums it up, as to what we're looking to do here in Broward County, as people throughout the country should be doing. We got to make sure that our parents, we got to make sure that our young people and our teachers, our guidance counselors understand what the signs of a possible cannabis-related overdose would be. The DEA tells us that 7 out of 10 counterfeit pills contain some sort of very dangerous substance, possibly fentanyl or xylazine. We've seized here a whole bunch of marijuana that's been laced with fentanyl and other products. Sometimes they call it smoking wet, where dealers will infuse marijuana cigarettes with a whole bunch of things, including fentanyl and xylazine. That's not the topic of conversation today, but those are extremely dangerous substances. So in the law enforcement community, we are concerned. We're scared. We want to keep this out of the hands of our young people. And my word of caution to all of you is just keep your eyes open and please be educated when it comes to this. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Dave. I mean, looking at some of those products, you wouldn't even be able to tell that they were drugs. They look like candy. I mean, it's pretty wild to see. And then hearing about fentanyl being in them as well, just very scary when it comes to our children. And speaking of children, almost an adult, but we do want to bring in Marvelly Montesir now. She's going to share with us the youth perspective. Marvelly, I mean, you're just an amazing student here, and we just really want to hear from you as a student. Okay, well, we don't have Marvelly at the moment. We'll try to get her back in. But in the meantime, what we'll do is we'll bring in Ellen Snelling. We introduced her earlier, but she's going to be discussing Delta 8 today, as well as TH policy and the mental health impacts from high potency products. I know some of the speakers beforehand have talked about some of these oils and such. She's also going to be discussing poison control numbers as well. So welcome, Ellen.
Hi, how's everybody doing today? Thank you so much for joining us this evening on this really important topic. And I'm going to have a PowerPoint pulled up here in just a minute. But I'm the board chair of the Hillsborough County Anti-Drug Alliance, and I've been involved in prevention for over 25 years. And I got into this field. I wasn't expecting to get in the field, but I have a daughter who's in recovery. She started using drugs, particularly marijuana, when she was in high school. So what is Delta 8 THC? A lot of people have never heard of it until recently. It's synthesized from CBD. So hemp, which produces CBD, which is not intoxicating, if you add acids, solvents, and heat, you can make THC. It's that simple. It's legal because of a loophole in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill was passed in 2018 at the federal level, legalized hemp, but little did anyone know that it could be made into an intoxicating drug. And that's what happened. So there's a loophole at the federal level, and it's up to each state to regulate it. It's sold in gas stations, convenience stores, smoke shops, CBD shops. I mean, no wonder our kids are getting their hands on it. It produces intoxicating effects, very similar to Delta 9 THC. So it's the difference between Delta 8 and Delta 9 THC is very, very small. So just think of it as the same drug, except there's no regulations, and it's found in convenience stores and gas stations. The products sold as Delta 8 are not pure. They can contain contaminants and other compounds, and they don't necessarily even have the amount of the drug that's supposed to be in there. And finally, there's plenty of other isomers. There's Delta 10, Delta 6, Delta 11, THCO, and chemists seem to be coming up with new synthetic cannabinoids made from hemp on a regular basis. What do these products look like? We had David Scharf showed us some examples, and it's really scary because honestly, it looks just like children's products. So we have Tittles, 500 milligrams of THC, and then we have these vape products, but they're so colorful looking, and they're bright colors, fruit flavors, attractive to children. So everything from edibles, vape products, flour to smoke, oils, capsules, beverages, chips, you name it, and they're putting hemp THC in it. So I found out about this about 2.5 years ago, and I've made it my mission to try to inform everyone about it because I just found it unbelievable that products that have drugs infused and look just like children's candy are being sold in gas stations and convenience stores. So I thought, well, I'll go in my neighborhood here in Temple Terrace, and they won't have these kind of things. Little did I know, I came home with plenty of different products, and some of them were Skittles and Nerds Rope that looked exactly like children's candy, but were full of THC. Then I saw a news story about a child whose family was visiting from Ohio, and they went to Tarpon Springs, spent the day there, got hungry and thirsty, and went to a place called Groovy Smoothie. And they ordered a cake pop for the child. the clerk informed the adults, like, well, if you're, if you want, we have cannabis enhanced smoothies and cake pops. And she said, no, it's a 3-year-old. I want your child version. So the child got the supposedly right cake pop, went in the car, ate it all. And within about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, he started crying, then screaming. He thought bugs were crawling all over him. And the next thing you know, he had passed out. So they brought him right to the emergency room, did a blood test, and the parents were shocked to find out that he had marijuana poisoning. Turned out the clerk gave the child the wrong cake pop, and it actually had THC in it. I thought, how can this happen? We're not a recreational marijuana state. How can a child be served THC? Well, it's because of the loophole in federal law, and Florida has legalized these products. Next, please. This is what I saw in the Newsweek story, and just seeing this child in a hospital bed when their family came to visit Florida to have a good time, and he ends up in the hospital because of THC. And anybody would like this product, honestly. It looks really good to me right about now, but it's a chocolate cake pop. Unfortunately, looks delicious, but it's full of THC. What does the FDA have to say about these products? Well, they issued a warning, and they say the products have not been evaluated or approved by the FDA. They've received multiple adverse event reports about these products, and over half of them required intervention to the point of either going to the emergency room or the hospital. Some of the adverse effects included hallucinations, vomiting, tremor, anxiety, dizziness, confusion, and loss of consciousness. And as Dave was talking about, it happens all over Florida. And these kids are getting these products in school, and they don't even know what it is, and they end up in the emergency room. Florida Poison Control Centers, they're really great with data. And we asked about, in Florida, how these hemp extract products are affecting our kids and adults. And if you look in the beginning, in 2016, before the Farm Bill passed, it was very, very low. You could barely see it. Farm Bill passes in 2018, and then fast forward to 2023, and we have 1,686 exposures to these products that are sending either people to the hospital or the emergency room, and almost half of them are children. So what do we do about these kind of things? Well, we try to get policy changes. And the coalitions were really good. For the past 2 years, we headed up to Tallahassee. We were armed with our educational materials. We had a great handout. We had samples. I've been collecting a lot of samples, but it's amazing when you spread this on a legislator's desk. They just think like, oh my gosh, this can't be right. We've got to do something about it. So we had SB 1698 sponsored by Senator Colleen Burton, and then HB 1613 sponsored by Representative Tommy Gregory. And these were two really good bills. They restricted the amount of THC in the packaging. And it was only 5 milligrams per serving, 50 milligrams per package. I mean, this is still, I consider it a lot, but when you look at the products I showed you, 500 milligrams in one package, and I've actually seen some in smoke shops that are up to 10,000 milligrams in one package of THC. Back in the 60s, a joint was 10 milligrams. And now we're seeing packages with 10,000. So the bill went on to define attracted to children, that none of these products can be attractive to children, no snack products attracted to children, and they were not allowing any of the synthetics, including Delta 8, Delta 10, HHC, all of those. The only thing allowed was very small amounts of Delta 9 THC. It passed in March 2024. We were all celebrating until still upset about this, but Governor DeSantis vetoed the bill in June. And why did he do this? We all try to get across the public health and safety message, and I think we did a great job with the legislators. But as soon as it passed, the hemp industry, including the stores, the lobbyists, anyone in the hemp industry that were selling these products, they bombarded our governor with emails, phone calls, and letters, like tens of thousands. And he listened to their story. They said they were going to go out of business and lose their job. And he said this bill would impose debilitating regulatory burdens on small businesses, and asked the legislators to revisit it in 2025. So we're back at the drawing board, and we're going to go back in 2025 and try to get a good bill passed. But in the meantime, we have to get the word out to the community that these products are still in our convenience stores, smoke shops, and gas stations. We have to keep kids away from them. What's the current marijuana policy in Florida? Well, a lot of cities and counties across the state have what's called decriminalization. So that means that possession of small amounts of marijuana can be a civil citation, or basically like a ticket. If you get more than one, you might go to a class. So it's not a criminal offense in certain cities and counties across the state. Then we have medical marijuana. So Amendment 2 passed in 2016, and then in 2017, legislation was passed and it was implemented. We now have over 900,000 medical marijuana patients in our state, but we don't have recreational marijuana. Let's look at the effect of legalization on the THC levels. And Jordan mentioned this, how it's skyrocketed. So back in 95, when there wasn't even medical marijuana, but then states, California legalized medical marijuana, and as time went on, there was recreational marijuana. And just look at the THC levels. Why is this happening? Well, maybe because there's more money to be made if it has really high THC levels. For whatever reason, it's been hybridized, and the plant nowadays has a lot of times in these shops 15% THC, but in Colorado, you go in a dispensary, you can find 30% plus in the flower. And not to mention the concentrates that we've heard about, the dabs, the oils, they can be 99% THC. So it's not your mom and dad's marijuana. The recreational marijuana products will look a lot like the hemp products that I showed you. They're colorful fruit flavors, snacks, candies, drinks. And this is one of the issues that other states have to deal with if they have recreational marijuana. The medical marijuana in Florida is not allowed to look like this, the edibles. They have to be in plain packaging, only 10 milligrams per serving, 200 milligrams per complete package, and they cannot have colors. So the medical marijuana edibles is completely different than what we'd see if we had recreational. The last thing I want to talk about is the effect of marijuana on the brain and mental health. And we've heard some things already about that. It's associated with depression, anxiety, paranoia, panic attacks, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. So marijuana can actually cause these. There's still research being done, but we know that it can serve as a cause of psychosis for sure, and also schizophrenia. But it can also make these conditions worse. So if someone has mental health disorders, they should most likely talk to their doctor, but marijuana could make it worse. Looking at the research, and Jordan also talked about this some, but young people, especially with a developing brain, if they are using marijuana, they are at much, much higher risk of having psychosis. So youth that use marijuana have a 6.5 times higher risk of developing psychosis than those who are not using it. And then one of the studies in Europe shows that 3 times higher risk among daily marijuana users. And if they're using the high potency, 5 times the risk. So there's so much we need to be spreading the word about to people, because I think there's a lot of myths that have been out in the media. Tonight, you have heard from expert speakers who discuss marijuana addiction, drug driving, and how marijuana affects the heart and mental health. And it is not the harmless plant, as we've been sold in the media. States that legalize marijuana can experience a lot of negative impacts, including increased DUI crashes, fatalities, and child poisonings. So armed with this knowledge, we would like you to go out and inform your neighbors, your friends, and everyone that you can talk to about the harms of marijuana. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ellen, for joining us. We do have Marvelly now. So Marvelly Mott is here. She's going to discuss the youth perspective as a student. We are so happy to have her. Hi, Marvelly.
Hi guys. So basically, I'm going to give you guys basically a point of view into what the youth are kind of seeing and are kind of thinking now. So basically, with me, marijuana use is something I experience and see within my community and school a lot. Like, it's not something that just happens once a year and you're like, oh, this kid got busted for having this. Like, it happens weekly, and the smell lingers with you everywhere, and to the point it follows you home, and it kind of consumes your thoughts. And to the point, it's become so common among teenagers that it's almost popularized to the point it's glorified and given a status. With local celebrities and like rapper like Kodak Black, he is kind of glorifying among the community. And basically, another icon is Snoop Dogg, which we kind of know is kind of his signature for having marijuana use with him. So to the point, it's kind of ingrained with these kids' lifestyles and social media. They see it being used by rappers, singers, actors, and they're not really threatened by it as they see people seem normal with the use. And it's so to the point they don't even think about it as being harmful substance to their body. And seeing it, and it clearly has a thin line between kids that have done it and not have done it, and you can see it. And I've witnessed it firsthand with how marijuana use can like change people. So my first year of high school, freshman year, there was this kid I knew, and he was like a well put together student. He had like clean side part. He wore his polo shirt. He had his khaki pants, and he was just that normal kid. Like he basically looked like Jake from State Farm. And over the summer, I just don't see him at all. And school starts, and he's completely gone. And I've seen all my friends basically, and he's just not here. I would probably gotten a heads up if he was gone or not. So I go on social media and I check Instagram. And then I realize why he's not in school. He basically dropped out and became a plug, which is a drug dealer, basically a nickname for that. And he goes around now saying marijuana to kids around the community. And there's not really a limit when it comes for plugs. Like some people, they're more depends, and they'll even go as low to sell to middle schoolers or even fifth graders. And once I've seen him and gone through his profile, he's basically became so hooked on this substance that he's not the same kid I knew. He became thin and kind of scrawny in a way to the point like he just doesn't look the same, and you can just see it in him. And his story isn't something unusual around the community. I've seen so many kids get affected to the point it's just not really saddening to some people. And the access for us is really easy. It's around our schools, bus stops, and it's even to get in touch with the plug online. You can go start your first account on Instagram or Snapchat, and a plug will find you before you even look for them. It's not really hard for kids to find it anymore. And it's just not one type of kid that gets caught into this stuff. It's kids from all parts around the community. It could be the suburbs, the low income areas, and kids are still being able to find this. It's not something, it's up to the kids for the temptations, or it could be even forced to them or even handed out to them as something they can find, either for as seen for fun or something they just need when they're low. So and they're not really educated on what this can happen, what can happen to them if they get in touch with this substance. So I would just really hope that we could just educate and get serious with our youth about its marijuana and its dangers and effects. Like this is something that shouldn't be joked around or seen as something funny, like in movies or social media. So I just hope we address this problem head on and not make light of the situation, so we can face the reality and help our youth and to progress. So thank you, and thank you for having me tonight.
And Marvelly, thank you for being here. It's so interesting always to hear the perspective of a student who's still in school and what you have to deal with on a daily basis. It definitely can't be easy. Okay, so we do want to open up the floor to questions. So you have the comment section there. Please write down those questions in the chat. We're going to try to get those answered, as many as possible. In the meantime, what we're going to do, we have a couple of questions already in here. So we'll start with some of these. We're going to bring in all our speakers and they can answer as these questions come in. Okay, so the first question here we have is, what is this substance called butter or honey oil that we're hearing about in our community?
I'll take that one, Terry. So we heard it throughout the presentations this evening about high level concentration marijuana. What people can do is utilize butane, even gasoline, to boil regular marijuana down, to concentrate THC as much as possible. You'll see it noted as butter. It looks like peanut brittle, oils that are just high concentration. Some meant for vaping, some meant for consumption. So when you hear these terms and you hear about the different types, these are all methods to concentrate the marijuana as much as possible. We've had instances here where people have become burned seriously while making these products and trying to create these products. I don't know, Jordan, if you've heard anything about that, but when you're using flammable substances to concentrate the oils in this stuff, it's not a good recipe. So it's around and it's scary, and let's do all we can to keep it out of our young people's hands.
It's interesting seeing some of the new versions that, things a lot of people haven't heard of. Dr. Stockham?
Well, I would like to add to that, if again, what they use to make them, if you think of butane, it's a carcinogenic. And again, you're ingesting that, you're using those products. So again, not healthy for the lungs whatsoever.
Yeah, many implications, I guess, a lot of people don't think about when you think about marijuana and these oils. Okay, so let's move on to another question that we have here. The next question I see, is there a value to set as a limit for driving like there is for alcohol? And then can a patient who has a medical marijuana card get arrested for DUI? I know, Dr. Stockham, you touched on this a bit, kind of the new technology coming out. So maybe you can take this question.
Okay, yeah, sure. It's two questions really. So I'm going to answer the second one. Can someone that has a medical marijuana card get pulled over and charged with drug driving? So yeah, the answer is yes. If impairment can be shown, then they can be charged with that. You don't get a get out of jail card because you have a medical marijuana card. So if you're using it to the point where you're impaired while you're driving, then yes, absolutely, you can be charged for that. The second part of the question is there a number like for alcohol? Like we have a 0.08, as most of the other states in the United States have, for driving under the influence. With marijuana, the more research we do, the more complicated and confusing it actually gets. So there is no magic number for us to use in our legislation, in our laws with drugs and driving. We used to think, that 5 nanograms per mil was that magic number, but as we study more and more, we can that lower concentrations, you can show impairment. And also people who are chronic, frequent, long-term users can have residual amounts in their blood, even days after they've, used the product. So, you don't want to arrest those people, you want to arrest the people who are truly impaired. So that's why showing impairment is going to be so important in these particular cases.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question here we have is, what is a good age to talk to children about marijuana and marijuana use?
I can start out on that one. I think as a parent, you really should start talking to kids about drugs at a young age, definitely elementary school, at least, because that's when they're going to be exposed to it, either other kids talking about it or possibly kids using it. That's just how it is now. So you don't want to wait till they're in high school. That is way too late. So I think at a young age, but at each developmental age, you probably would use a different technique to speak to them. But it could be as simple as seeing a billboard, and talking about it, or something on TV, just to get a conversation started. And I always recommend start a conversation, ask questions, because you don't want to give them too much information, but you want to make sure that if they've already heard something, that you can give them the correct information. And you also want to set your standard on whether you think a child should drink or use drugs. We want to make sure it's clear so that they know what you expect out of them.
Yeah,
Another.
I
Go ahead.
just want to add, these should be dinner time conversations between parents and young people. But I would tell you, we go around our county talking to middle school, high school age kids, and these kids know as much as we do. So it's more about educating the parents about the dangers of these types of drugs, more so than the kids. The kids know a whole bunch of stuff. So the more they think that their parents know, I think the better off it's going to be. So when we do presentations at schools, we're constantly talking to administrators and teachers and parents, teaching them that there are dangers out there when it comes to drugs, particularly marijuana and some of the other things, and that they need to engage their children. They need to engage. They can't be scared of the conversation. It needs to happen. Sometimes it's uncomfortable and scary, but these are conversations that need to be had.
I mean, I know even for me, I'm not a parent yet, but there's new terminology every day. It seems like there are new products out every day. It seems like as well. Another question, maybe one of you can ask is, or answer rather, is, how do you go about as a parent learning, and as Dave said, being educated, and then opening the door for your children to be able to come to you with, their concerns and their questions?
Well, I'll step in one more time quickly because this drives me nuts. Check your kids' phones. The emojis that are being used out in the community to reference some of these drugs will shock you. Make sure that parents, we have actually pamphlets we give out that shows folks what these actual emojis look like. So when you're ordering something on the dark web or even on the regular web, and you want to keep it clandestine via Instagram or X or whatever forum you want to use, the parents need to know what these emojis mean and what these kids are using to kind of mask it from them and protect them from it. We've had instances where there's dealers who will drop stuff off in a particular place in their neighbor's yard under a specific rock. So there's going to be any attempt at all from these people who are peddling this garbage to kids to get it in their hands. So the parents, I can't stress it enough. They just have to be cognizant of what's going on. They can't be scared about going in their kids' rooms and looking around. They can't be scared about looking at those phones. I personally get to go to a lot of overdose scenes in our county, and we do overdose fatality reviews. And the stories that you hear about young people succumbing to substance use disorder, it's mind-boggling and scary. So if there's any message I can give from the law enforcement, from the criminal justice community, is please spread the word. Use your kids as ambassadors. We need to use all of us as ambassadors to make sure that the word gets out that there are dangerous substances out there. And this marijuana stuff that we're seeing, as you guys have seen, can be extremely dangerous. So I won't say any more, but I just hope that everybody gets the message and can help us spread the word about this dangerous stuff.
Another question. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to jump in on that. I 100% agree with you about educating parents, and not just educating them, but like you said, parents need to be aware that they have to make sure their children are safe. And that includes going into their room, looking around. That's not their private area that you can never go into. So I feel like having a daughter in recovery, and I know that's the kind of thing I did. I would look at notes if I needed to. I would look at empty canisters of whippets or whatever. I mean, you don't want to find out this stuff after there's an overdose. That's all I can say. So it's your job to get in between drugs and your child.
So another question here, it kind of touching on what both Dave and Ellen said. What can be done to protect children from marijuana, candy, and other edibles? Let's say kind of the situation we saw in the school. A student brings this bag, looks like candy, and is passing it out. I know there's a peer pressure element. There's so much more to it. How do you talk to, your student about this and make sure that they, know not to take, I guess, something that could look like a candy but isn't?
Well, the disturbing thing is in the two instances in Lauderdale and Lauderdale Lakes, those were medical marijuana products that were bought obviously by a parent and left out. And these young people grabbed it and thought it was regular candy. So there's a lot of pressure there should be a lot of pressure on parents if they do have a medical marijuana card to keep it away from kids, to make sure that it's out of sight. And you got to take responsibility as a parent if you're going to do this. As far as the kids go, and this is one of our huge messages, don't take anything from anybody. It's different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. If someone offers you something, we tell our young people, just don't take it. Eat the lunch that's provided to you in your cafeteria or what's packed in your lunchbox or in your thermos. There's no reason at this point it's kind of sad, but we can't trust anything.
Very true. So a question from a viewer here. It says, I know we've touched on a bunch of these, but this viewer is asking, what are the top 3 tips that you would give to parents that maybe people would not think of? So anything that you guys can think of that would help out parents when it comes to talking to their kids and just protecting children.
Well, I'll start off again.
Okay. So basically, I would make sure that from a young age, I would probably start from probably before they enter elementary school, because these kids, they're not really, I feel like parents and adults look down on kids thinking they're not as smart as they are. Many kids kind of get a hint of what they're talking about. And I would definitely try to make sure the kids know, like, not to touch. And I'd kind of give them a reason not to touch any stuff. Kids love candy, and it's really hard to get them away from that. So I would try to kind of provide my kids, making sure they're kind of comfortable with what they have and not try to reach out and touch and eat other kids' stuff. That's like, I want to make sure, you got to make sure that kids don't reach out in certain situations. Just try to get candy from teachers and not from their little friends, even though it could like hurt their feelings or so.
And Dave, I know you had something you wanted to say as well.
Again, it goes back to education of parents. When we had those instances here in the schools, and we, during our investigation, showed that these were medical marijuana products that were brought into schools. The responsibility of levels of parents should come from everywhere. I mean, I still can't understand how that could have happened, but it did, and it will continue in the future. I would hope that when this stuff is sold in medical dispensaries, that there are some safeguards that are in place. Maybe there can be pamphlets given out about protecting your drugs and protecting your products, so keep them out of the hands of kids. I just, again, I find it very hard to swallow that they didn't know that they should have done that. So I don't know. From my perspective, I think those people like that need to be prosecuted.
Dr. Stockholm, I saw that you raised your hand.
Yeah, I know in those cases of those items that are very similar in packaging and names, the FDA has sent those companies, kind of cease and desist, because it's too the Cheetos and the Doritos. But then I don't think they get anywhere. I don't, so that they'll just open up as a different company. So I think somehow we need to have better legislation, federal level, as how they can package those things.
Okay, thank you. Jordan, this might be a good question for you because I know you touched on this a bit. A viewer question here is, can you point to studies that show the addictive properties of marijuana that I can pass to a few people who might benefit from that information? I know you definitely touched on that during your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. There are many studies that talk about the addictive potential of marijuana, and there are even some great videos by experts out there that discuss kind of the physical addiction. There's this myth that marijuana isn't physically addictive, and that's totally untrue. For some basic data and data that I think everyone would trust, even if you go to the CDC, if you look up marijuana CDC or marijuana NIDA, National Institute on Drug Abuse, that's under the NIH. You can see just on their web pages about marijuana, they have studies that they cite that they think is reliable, that says that the addiction rate of marijuana is around 30% today. So you can see what federal agencies are saying about that, and that's information that I trust.
Another question for you as well here is marijuana physically addictive as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's physically addictive, and I'm not a licensed physician or a medical or scientific expert, but from what I understand, from what I've learned from the people who are, it is physically addictive. Your body has a natural endocannabinoid system, which is kind of like a pleasure system. I don't know if it's similar chemically to dopamine, but that's how I kind of like to think of it. And you can stimulate that naturally. And so when you ingest something like THC, which is a cannabinoid, and you stimulate the endocannabinoid system in an unnatural way, the receptors, as I understand, that are part of that endocannabinoid system can essentially burn out or not be able to adapt as well to natural stimulants for your endocannabinoid system. So if anyone is, I don't know, Terry Stockman, if you know more about this, if I'm incorrect about that, you might be more of a science expert, but that's what I understand. And so if you do smoke marijuana, especially for a long period of time, that can change how your endocannabinoid system operates and create a more physical addiction because you're not experiencing those more like natural pleasures. You have to get that from THC.
What I wanted to add, what I was going to add is that if you just simply go to DSM-5, it's listed there as a mental disorder, marijuana substance use disorder. So it's accepted, by that group of mental health and medical doctors. It's included in that DSM.
Jordan, I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing, but just maybe a little bit about your personal experience and going through, marijuana dependency and those kind of, feelings during that time in your life. Did you feel those physical symptoms?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, I did, and some of the things, especially when I got sober, that I noticed was I could barely eat, I could barely put down half of a sandwich. I felt absolutely exhausted. Wasn't really able to get out of bed. Even during my addiction, I mean, one night, my dealer was going to, I guess, drop off more marijuana for me because I ran out, and he couldn't essentially get to where I was at. And that night that I didn't sleep without smoking marijuana, I really felt like it was almost ants crawling underneath my skin. It was almost bizarre. If anyone's ever experienced nicotine withdrawal, which I have unfortunately as well, it felt oddly similar to that. And after just using it every single night, and I got really angry and really irritable, and I just felt like I wanted to punch a wall. And that was just a totally physical reaction. And for me, that was actually an important moment for me, because I think looking back, it was pretty hard for me to tell myself that nothing was wrong and that it was just a social user or something like that. So I definitely felt the kind of like physical impacts, during that experience.
Marvelly, could you kind of talk to us about, peer pressure in school? You're the one who's there every day feeling it.
All right. So basically, around my school, in my area, there is a few dealers, and I'm really not a person for that stuff. But it's really easy to peer pressure kids, especially if this their only friend group and they're all starting to get stuck on one thing. And especially if it's like the edibles or something like a sweet treat. teens, just like
You're a
little
business
kids,
owner.
will go after it and eat it. Hello? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, continue.
So basically, oh yeah. So basically, it's not peer pressure is there, and it's really hard for kids not to for it, especially if it's a treat that's dangling right in their face, and their friends are like, "Oh, it felt really great that it happened," or "I saw this when it happened." It kind of gives the kids the feeling to want to feel a thrill of their lives, especially if they're missing out on something already within the friend group.
So what would you tell other students your age, younger, older, just about avoiding that peer pressure and not, submitting to it?
I would say stick to your values. Your values make who you are, and no one's gonna hurt you for saying no. It's your defense, and it's how you are as a person that what you need to worry about. Don't worry about getting into anything else. Just focus on your health and how you're gonna move forward with life.
Very good advice there.
And,
Go ahead.
Terry, I got to say that in Broward County, there are some wonderful programs going on. Break the Vape, these youth programs and services, alternative spring break, where the young people in our community get together and stand strong and tall against this stuff and are not afraid. So while we dwell on the negative, there's so many positive things happening in our communities where our young people are stepping up to the plate and taking this thing on, whether it's wearing their shirts or gathering at a certain place and talking about this stuff. So we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the positives in our communities. And I'm sure all of our communities have the same types of groups.
If someone wanted to get involved, a student wanted to get involved in one of these groups, what would they need to do, Dave?
In Broward County, through the United Way Commission on Behavioral Health, United Way has many groups, many organizations. So I don't know if there's anybody on from that group. Jenna Stein's one of our experts there, and there's easy ways to make connections. So if you want to just get in contact with anybody, just go to the United Way website. Commission on Drug Prevention, and you'll see many opportunities and events during the summer, during spring break. There's so many positive things. They're all out there, easily accessible.
Wonderful. A question for you, Jordan, that we see here. It says, does legalize
looks like Terry cut out. I believe she was asking about the black market, though. I believe we had discussed that, and I know that was a question from someone, so maybe I'll assume that was the question and answer it. I think it was about legalization and reducing the black market. So when we talk about legalization, one of the kind of promises that is often made in states that are considering it is that it's going to reduce or even eliminate the black market in that state. And we've seen that broadly to be untrue. In many states, more than 50% of the marijuana sold even a decade after legalization is sold on the black market. So prime example of this would be California. California was actually the first state to legalize any form of marijuana. In 1996, California legalized medical marijuana. And about 10 or so years ago, they legalized recreational marijuana. And so even though it's been legal medically since 1996, just a couple of years ago, the LA Times did some reporting and showed that 75% of the marijuana sold in California was sold on the black market. And it's kind of a tough balance, because what people who are maybe very pro marijuana would say is, oh, well, we need to cut all these regulations because the regulations and taxes are making marijuana more expensive and we can't compete with the black market. But then again, if you don't have regulations and you don't have tax dollars, people are usually promised that tax dollars are going to go to things that they support, even though that almost never happens. And the regulations are supposedly supposed to keep marijuana safer, even though it's not really working, or limit certain advertising to kids, even though that also doesn't really work. And so I don't think people would really get behind that approach. It's kind of a unique space where it's tough to eliminate the black market. Another element of this is there isn't that much enforcement, whether it's federally or within the state, about the black market. We're seeing this in New York right now, where there are thousands of illicit marijuana dispensaries, 3,000 or so, and they're only shutting down a couple hundred. It's totally out of control in New York, and the legal industry has only a few dispensaries opened up. So we're not seeing this pan out as really was promised to voters in almost any state.
So a big question. Did someone else want to say something? Okay, so a big question here, I guess, would be what's next? Where do we go from here as far as protecting our children? I think that's one of the most important things, really, to get across to parents, but also to our youth. Maybe we can hear from all of you just about that, what parents should do next, leaving this, what they should take away from this.
I could start if you'd like, Terry.
Sure.
You see in the chat that there are some very positive things happening and percentages of young people not using this stuff. So I don't think the kids want to hear from me. They don't want to hear from the old people. They want to hear from each other. They want to be supported by their peers. And if their peers are at the point where they're tired of it, where they're tired of going into a bathroom where there's vapes going, every single break period, they need to step up, and they need to police themselves a little bit more. When we talked about educating parents, it's like I said earlier, it's basically like opening the discussions, not being afraid of the discussions, not being afraid to talk to their kids, their parents, their neighbors. There's no reason not to. The consequences are too high for these conversations not to be had. I guarantee you, when Jordan was in the throes of his addiction and when he was younger, he wouldn't want to hear from me about this. He'd want to hear about it from his peers. So people who he trusts, to say, hey, that's not cool anymore. Let's do something about it. So that's why when I speak in public, it's really trying to use these youngsters as ambassadors to both parents and parent groups, teacher groups, student groups.
Anyone else want to comment on this?
I will. So I think a couple of the take homes that I like people to realize is I don't think many people think it's impairing as much as it is in regards to driving. So I think everybody should think of that before they get behind the wheel of a car when they're doing it, and that young people should not get in a car where the driver has been using marijuana. You're twice as likely to be in a car crash after smoking marijuana, and up to 6 times if you're using those high concentrated waxes, oils, butters. So that would be one thing. I think another thing that we discussed here is that it is addictive. Physical dependence does occur, and you do have a withdrawal syndrome with that. And there have been studies in New Zealand that show that people that regularly use marijuana, they're less educated, they're more likely to be on government subsidies, less likely to be regularly employed. So there's a lot of consequences to it. And then what we can do as a group to really hone in on the packaging of those other compounds, the candies and the any of that, get that out of the market.
Hey Terry, I can comment on this next.
Go ahead.
And Dave, unfortunately, what you said was probably pretty spot on. I talked about, I think earlier when I was telling my story about how the most impactful, I didn't even maybe say the most, but the really things that I brought up were about friends and peers intervening in my life. And so I think in terms of like next steps, like where can we go? What can parents do, adults do? I guess I'll preface this by saying something interesting that actually kind of surprises a lot of people. The most permissive generation regarding marijuana, or people have the most positive views of marijuana, are actually millennials. It's not even my generation. I guess I'm probably Gen Z, and I think that's because there are millennials who, some of them might be a little too young to have kids, so they're not parents yet, but they are, and grew up in an age where marijuana wasn't as potent, and so but still was being used more widely, increasingly. So I think that kind of trifecta leads them to have more positive opinions. It's interesting because they're even more permissive than Gen Z is, and in my opinion, it's not necessarily based on data, but anecdotally, is that my generation, a lot more people are using a lot heavier, kind of more potent products and experiencing a lot of issues with it. I've been very public about my story. And I get messages all the time from kids who went to college with me, kids who went to high school with me, people, just friends that I know, even just acquaintances, kind of asking how do I get help? How do I help my friends, my family members, because they're struggling. So I think something interesting going forward to talk to kids about isn't just about, of course, you have to say why marijuana is bad for you, why you shouldn't do it, kind of what's the data, what's the science. But something that kids might be even more receptive to is like, watch out for your friends. Right? Because even if they're not buying a ton of stuff, they're probably seeing kids in their school who aren't looking right, aren't like acting right, friends who are acting a little bit differently, kind of giving the signs of withdrawing from relationships and what substance use does to that. And it's, I think, a lot easier for people to identify problems in others than themselves, or even imagine others having problems rather than themselves. And if we can make kids even more aware of what's going on with their peers and possibly their friends, I think they'll get to a point where if they have a friend that they notice, wow, they've changed. It might be because of their marijuana use, and kind of planting that idea that that's actually something that's even possible to happen, that might change or influence their views on these high THC products just more generally. And that's certainly pretty much exactly what happened to me. But I don't think that's as talked about as a strategy, rather than just tell them why it's bad. And of course, you have to do that. So that's something, kind of a piece of advice that I would say going forward.
That's wonderful insight. And I think you bring a great perspective to this. And the utilization of peers, whether they're youth peers or adult peers, certified peer specialists in our communities are one of the greatest and most valuable assets that we have in combating a bunch of different things. These are people with lived experience, just kind of like we talked about, who can offer insight and have been there before, and have bounced back and maybe have failed once or twice or three times. So the insight from those who have been there is extremely important, Jordan, and you just summed it up very well. That's who we need to leverage the most in our communities.
Marvel, you want to comment?
Yeah. So basically, what I would say, keeping a tip for them is real. Like, to the point the kids fully understand the extent of what could happen to them. It's like, when you take a joke out of something, it's really hard to make kids not really want to do something or see it as a threat. So you can be very in depth with the kids and go just show them photos, videos, before and afters of what happened to people with marijuana use, show them studies, but also keep them interested while you're educating them on what could happen. Because kids are very easy to board or make them lose interest when it comes to talking about stuff like this.
Ellen?
Well, I think I've heard everyone make some really good points. I think it has to be both parents and young people. For young people, I'd like to see more prevention and having these youth groups like we talked about, and youth clubs where they set the norm that not using drugs is the way to go, and it's better for the rest of your life and for your health, and as much primary prevention as possible. But if someone is using, it would be great if it's friends don't let friends smoke pot, and just go back to that, like, let's help out each other and have that, not just a peer pressure, but be there for them when they need help, and also give them that nudge, like maybe a few friends can do an intervention. And as far as parents, they just need to be on top of things. And I don't think this has already been mentioned, but people don't take marijuana seriously. Like even marijuana and driving versus alcohol and driving. Like it seems like the message, don't drink and drive, everyone's heard it. A lot of people listen to it, but using marijuana and driving, it's unbelievable what I've heard from young people and adults, but they don't even think that it's impairing. Some people even think it helps them drive better. Medical marijuana, I've heard from the DUI officers, people pull out their medical card. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you pulling me over? I have a medical card. So there's so much information that needs to be out there to both young people and adults, specifically about marijuana, because I don't think people take it seriously enough and they don't realize the ramifications that it can have on their life. So that's all I got.
Does anyone else have any final thoughts they'd like to mention before we wrap it up? No. Okay, well, it seems like, and maybe you all can just agree or, comment. It seems like a lot of this is about communicating with your student. Dave mentioned, keeping an eye on your children and what they're, talking about online and what they're into, and talking to each other. It seems like a lot of the education and prevention is through communication. Would you all pretty much agree that that's one of the main things here that we need to see going into the future, is just communicating with the youth?
No doubt. No doubt. And I'll say this. We hear this all the time. It takes a village. In our community, having had the opportunity and the privilege of chairing some of these commissions, and realizing what people in our community are doing and what power we have in numbers, and via different specialists, whether they're peers, whether they're clinicians, whether they're advocates, and it's just amazing what can happen when a community comes together and wants to solve a problem. So I would encourage anybody out there who's listening who hasn't formulated any community-based task forces or action teams to do that. It takes doctors, it takes nurses, it takes toxicologists, it takes a whole bunch of people to address these problems and fix them. So if anybody has any interest in creating a coalition in your community, you can reach out to any one of us. We're all involved in those things, and we all understand and realize the power of these groups and these commissions to move the needle forward, whether it be legislatively or within your own small communities.
Anyone else with any final thoughts? Okay, well, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers, as well as everyone who's watching and joining us on this panel, ask questions. We just want to mention one more time the 710 joint event. Well, we highlighted critical issues here that are surrounding the use of cannabis concentrates, especially among our children. I mean, the important future of our world. So we hope that through these informative presentations shared, and you heard some very personal stories here, as well as our discussions, that you've gained a deeper understanding of the significant health risks posed by these products to our youth out there. So the next step here is to share this information. You can share with your friends, your family, your neighbors, really anyone. We talked about all the important aspect of communication here, so that people who might not know about some of these dangers or addictive properties, or even some of the advice about, keeping marijuana away from children, so we can protect our youth from some of these unnecessary consequences. It really is about communication. So if you'd like to host an educational event of your own like this, you can email the South Florida Community Coalitions. That email is prevention@pbcbhc.org. I know you heard from Dave there as well. There are many different outreach programs, many different ways to communicate and to educate our young people. And once again, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us this evening.